A little girl named Addison Faith Richburg was born prematurely on August 12, 2011, during the 33rd week of her mother's pregnancy. Brandy's in the city of Charleston, United States. Addison's head had already grown to the size of a child's by the 39th week of pregnancy, and physicians were baffled as to how he had managed to survive till then. According to the Daily Mail, the information's correct. Based on the results of an ultrasound performed when Brandy was admitted to the hospital in labor, the obstetrician feared that the baby had hydrocephalus, which is an abnormal rise in fluid inside the cerebral cavity that typically results in mental impairment. When the doctor examined the infant shortly after birth, however, he discovered that the volume was in fact a huge tumor near the base of the brain that needed to be removed. In the beginning, experts speculated that the disease would be classified as GPID, which is a highly aggressive and difficult-to-beat brain tumor that's difficult to cure. Children who are diagnosed with the condition typically live for up to 9 months after being diagnosed. A few days after the baby's birth, her parents were already being vilified by the public. It was the worst possible situation. She didn't move, and there was no life or color in her eyes or on her face. She was dead, Brandy expressed herself. Overnight, though, it appeared as though the situation had changed. The baby began to move more and eat more nutritiously. Seeing Addison's growth gave the family reason to be optimistic. Doctors discovered that the tumor had begun to shrink at a routine exam on August 22nd and reversed their previous diagnosis of PID, which never regressed in the first place. In the coming days, a new examination will be performed in order to assess the baby's overall health. Because of her limited life expectancy, she's still unable to have a biopsy. Since then, Addison's been treated with steroids to reduce swelling in his brain, which was already prevented the little one from moving freely and raising the danger of infection at the time of surgery. According to Brandy, the child's parents are concerned about what will happen next. Steroids will cause her heart rate to accelerate, which she finds alarming, but we recognize that it's the only option available to us, so we strive to remain optimistic. Because Addison's family lives 70 kilometers away from the hospital where she's being treated, her parents launched an internet campaign to raise money to cover the cost of therapy, transportation, and lodging. Addison Faith Richburg was born on August 12, 2013 at the age of 33 weeks into her mother's pregnancy. Doctors observed that her head was bloated before she was delivered and determined that she had a buildup of fluid on her brain. Her mother, Brandy, was transported to the Medical University of South Carolina for an emergency cesarean section. Addie was sent to the hospital for an MRI, where she was found to have a tumor near the base of her brain. Because she's so small, physicians are unable to perform a biopsy to establish what's wrong with her. Brandy expressed gratitude to the doctors at MUSC for saving her daughter's life, saying the family's grateful to them. Having been born 7 weeks early, a 2-week premature infant is completely a conundrum to doctors. She was born with a huge and inexplicable tumor on her brainstem, making her a complete puzzle to them. Addison Faith Richburg was born in a hospital in Charleston, South Carolina, barely 33 weeks after her mother became pregnant. However, physicians discovered that her skull had already grown to the size that it should have been at 39 weeks of pregnancy before she was delivered. Doctors performed scans on Addison because they suspected a fluid reservoir on her brain. They discovered that she had hydrocephalus, which is a buildup of cerebrospinal fluid in her head. An MRI was performed as soon as she was born to determine the cause of the fluid buildup. It was discovered that she had a large tumor in the base of her brain, and she was immediately transferred to the hospital. At first, physicians told them that it appeared to be an inoperable brain tumor, which is often found in older children and has a life expectancy of 9 months at the most. Just as the family was beginning to come to grips with the news, the physicians changed their minds and stated that they would be incorrect after all. And now, 2 weeks later, Addie's parents are still waiting for answers since she's too ill to be sent in for a biopsy because she's in such poor health. When Addie's mother awoke on August 12th, it was simply another ordinary Saturday morning in her household. "I went to use the restroom and realized I'd forgotten where I put my mucus plug," Brandy explained to the Daily Mail Online. "When I decided to go online to double-check, I discovered a slew of conflicting information and numerous sources. However, one of my nurse friends advised me that I should definitely go to the hospital and get it checked out, which I duly did. When Brandy first arrived at the hospital, the nurses assured her that everything was normal and that she would not be experiencing contractions or feeling pain until later in the day. She then went into screening with her obstetrician, who discovered that Brandy was 3 inches dilated and in the early stages of preterm labor after inspecting her. As Brandy described, she was taken aback because she hadn't anticipated it and had not yet experienced any contractions or other symptoms. Before transferring her to the operation room, the doctor performed an ultrasound to determine the baby's size. It was discovered by the doctor that her head was the proper size for 39 weeks, even though she was only 33 weeks pregnant. They determined that she had hydrocephalus, which means that there's a buildup of fluids in her head, and things change immediately. And I was sent by ambulance to the Medical University of South Carolina. It was at that point that I became quite concerned, since I could see the expressions on the faces of all the nurses and doctors. Brandy had to have a cesarean section because she has scoliosis, which prevents her from giving birth naturally. Because it was an emergency situation, she was sedated during the procedure. Almost immediately after Addie's birth, she was brought to the hospital for an emergency MRI to establish the reason of her hydrocephalus. She weighed only 4 pounds and was only 17 inches in length. Doctors then returned and informed Addie's parents that she had a huge tumor on the base of her brain, which was the source of her hydrocephalus and needed to be removed. Because of her large size, physicians are still unsure of the nature of the tumor and have not commenced surgery to remove it. When doctors first discovered the tumor, they suspected it was diffuse pontine glioma, DIPG, a rare and highly aggressive tumor that develops at the base of the brainstem. Intractable DIPG experts pressure on a part of the brain known as the pons, which regulates functions such as respiration, blood pressure, and heart rate. DIPG is incurable and has no known cure. The disease is incurable, and the vast majority of children who are diagnosed with this type of cancer die within 9 months after being diagnosed. As DIPG is most usually diagnosed in youngsters between the ages of 5 and 9, if Addie had been diagnosed with the tumor, she would be the youngest person ever diagnosed with it. Brandy and her husband Josh began to lose hope on the Tuesday following the birth of their daughter. The parents were informed that their daughter was likely suffering from an incurable brain tumor, and they witnessed her life slipping away before it had begun. It was at her lowest point. She wasn't moving and appeared to be absolutely lifeless. In Brandy's words, there was no color in her face. However, the following morning, things began to improve. It was like everything changed overnight. She regained a lot of the color in her skin and began to eat more healthfully and use the restroom more frequently. Her hands and feet would move when we touched her, the mother recalled. She was quite responsive. The family's optimism was bolstered by her recovery, according to Brandy, but they were still concerned about the chance that she had DIPG. Adding to the excitement, Addie had her follow-up MRI on August the 22nd, which revealed that the tumor had begun to decrease, albeit only a little. Doctors were forced to retract their earlier diagnosis as a result of this revelation, leaving the family with even fewer explanations. The doctors no longer believe it's DIPG because it's shrunk a little, which does not happen with one of those tumors, so they're at a loss for what to do, Addie stated. The next MRI will be performed on August 30th, and the results will indicate that they'll be able to biopsy the tumor in order to examine it. Her parents will continue to be in the dark about what's wrong with their daughter until that time. As Brandy noted, because she's so small, doctors are delaying the procedure for as long as they possibly can. They've been absolutely great in terms of delivering the news to us in general. The personnel at the Medical University of South Carolina has been instrumental in keeping our kid alive and saving her life thus far. Addie is described as a mystery baby, and the doctors and nurses are always attempting to fit together the puzzle pieces until they can determine what's wrong with her. Not knowing what it is or what it could be makes me feel awful. It's quite frightening. We just have to keep hoping and praying that the tumor's size will continue to shrink. Other techniques to addressing some of the symptoms are being considered by doctors until they're able to begin treating the tumor itself. As a result of the tumor and the hydrocephalus, she's experienced brain bleeding that's flowed down her spinal cord. Consequently, it's become extremely bloated, making it difficult for Addie to move and increasing the likelihood of infection. A high-dose course of steroids is being administered to the infant in order to minimize the swelling, and she's having fluid evacuated from her brain on a daily basis through a reservoir at the top of her skull. As Brandy stated, the steroids will cause her heart rate to rise, which is really frightening. But we recognize that it's the only line of action available at this time, so we're counting our blessings and attempting to be optimistic. Given that their home is 43 miles away from the hospital where Addie's receiving treatment, and that they're spending so much time at the hospital, the family's raising money through crowdfunding to assist cover the cost of the treatment.